Welcome to our channel, where the ink of history bleeds beyond dry dates and dusty textbooks. On June 23, 2016, the world watched in stunned silence as the UK voted to leave the EU, a decision with a mere 4% margin that reshaped British history. The difference between the supporters of Leave and Remain campaigns. But what exactly drove this seismic shift? Brexit, a portmanteau of the words British and exit, is a complex story woven with threads of economics, immigration, a yearning for national autonomy, and a search for a redefined British identity. Let's rewind. Back in 1973, the UK joined the European Economic Community, EEC, a union built on the dream of a freer flow of goods, services, and people across Europe. It seemed like a perfect match. The UK gained access to a massive market for its exports, while the EEC welcomed a powerful new member with a strong global presence. But cracks began to appear in this seemingly happy union. Some Britons felt the EEC, which later became the EU or the European Union, was becoming too overbearing. Brussels, the EU's headquarters, started to feel like a distant bureaucratic monster dictating everything. Eurosceptics, as they were known, argued that Britain was losing control over its own laws and regulations. Certain EU treaties resulted in a growing amount of power being shifted from individual member states to the EU bureaucracy. Wherever the EU has granted authority, like in agriculture, copyright and patent law, and competition policy, its rules override national laws. Britons yearned for a return to the days when the UK could chart its own course independently. This sentiment wasn't entirely new. Euroscepticism had simmered for decades. It was fueled by concerns about the loss of national identity and a perception that the UK was not getting a fair deal from the EU. The economic argument was another battleground. While the EU undoubtedly boosted trade, many Britons felt the benefits weren't evenly distributed. A lot of the EU budget is spent on agricultural support, but the UK has a relatively small agricultural sector. Therefore, the per-head amount it proportionately gets is much less than the other countries. Traditional industries in some regions also struggled to compete with cheaper imports from other parts of the EU. Another point of contention was the UK's contribution to the EU budget. Eurosceptics argued that Britain was paying more into the EU than it got back, subsidizing poorer member states. It was paying around 13 billion euros per annum. They believed that leaving the EU would free up significant funds that could be reinvested in the UK's public services. The issue of immigration became a potent weapon in the hands of the Leave campaign. Over 1 million people sought asylum in Europe a year before the Brexit referendum. Between 2014 and 2017, Germany is said to have accepted over 1.5 million new asylum applicants. Though the migrant crisis was completely different from the free movement of EU nationals, it still had a prominent place in the Brexit referendum. With open borders within the EU, some Britons felt a loss of control over their borders and a strain on public services. Concerns about competition for jobs, housing, and access to social benefits fueled anxieties. The Leave campaign leaders promised to take back control of the UK's borders, laws, and money. Their message resonated with voters who felt left behind by globalization and disillusioned with the political establishment. The Remain campaign, on the other hand, emphasized the economic and security benefits of EU membership. They warned that leaving the EU would isolate the UK and damage its economy. However, their message failed to capture the imagination of a significant portion of the electorate. In a highly charged referendum campaign, the fault lines in British society became starkly exposed. Age, geography, and social class all played a role in how people voted. Younger generations, more globally minded and benefiting from the free movement of people, tended to vote Remain. Older generations, feeling disconnected from a changing world, were more likely to vote leave. London, a cosmopolitan hub, was a Remain stronghold, while many rural areas voted leave. The result of the referendum, a narrow victory for leave with 52% of the vote, shocked the world and plunged the UK into political turmoil. Prime Minister David Cameron resigned, and the country embarked on a long and arduous process of negotiating its exit from the EU. The years following the referendum were marked by political uncertainty and bitter debate. The terms of the UK's withdrawal, triggered by invoking Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union, were complex and fraught with difficulty. Negotiations with the EU dragged on for months, with disagreements over several key issues. One of the most contentious issues was the Irish border. The Republic of Ireland, a member state of the EU, shares a land border with Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. Due to the EU's single market and customs union, an open border existed for decades. Another major sticking point was the status of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU. Millions of people had built their lives based on the free movement of people within the EU. The question was how to guarantee their rights after Brexit. Finally, there was the issue of the financial settlement. How much the UK would owe the EU to cover its outstanding financial obligations. The negotiations were a tense affair, with deadlines looming and compromises hard-won. Eventually, it took several attempts and a change in Prime Minister before the withdrawal agreement was finally passed in early 2020. This marked the official date of Brexit, January 31st, 2020. However, a transition period followed, allowing the UK to continue participating in the single market and customs union until the end of the year. This period was used to negotiate a new trade deal between the UK and the EU, which would define their future relationship. The trade deal was finally signed on December 30th, 2020. The story of Brexit is far from over. The long-term consequences of the UK's exit from the EU are still unfolding. The impact on trade, the economy, and social cohesion remains to be seen. Only time will tell if Brexit was a bold leap forward for the UK or a self-inflicted wound.